Imagine this: you are a gambler who doesn't believe in luck, only in math. You are down to your last chip. The odds of winning are 1 in a billion. Statistically, this is 0. You roll the dice, ready to lose everything and walk away. But the dice land on the winning number. Not once, but 10 times in a row. You look at the dice. You look at the dealer. Your rational mind is screaming, this is probability. This is randomness. This is survivorship bias. But deep in your gut, a terrifying thought takes root: this game is rigged. And it was rigged in your favor. When an atheist experiences a miracle, they don't call it God, they call it a statistical anomaly. But does a statistical anomaly care about your pain? Does a random number generator have mercy? That strange, unsettling feeling that the chaotic universe suddenly aligned itself just to catch you as you fell, is the spark of the oldest detective story in human history. Today, we aren't looking for mathematical formulas, we are looking for the house that loaded the dice. The ultimate thought experiment we are exploring in this episode is the proof of God's existence. Some people, upon hearing this topic, might think, what is there to prove? Most of us are atheists. God simply doesn't exist, he only exists in religious texts. Are you trying to preach? Don't jump to conclusions just yet. We know that there are many intellectuals in this world, including scientists, philosophers, and mathematicians, who are attempting to use reason, to use knowledge, to clarify the existence of that ultimate being. We all know there is a discipline called theology. Simply put, theology is the study of God using knowledge and reason. A key subject within theology is the proof of God's existence. You say you are studying God? Well, this God must first actually exist. This fact must first be established. So, how do you establish it? For intellectuals, you certainly don't determine this through shamanistic rituals or trances. You must use rational argumentation to prove the existence of God. Similarly, if you believe God does not exist, you also need to use reason to refute it. So, to thrash out this ultimate question, today we will share 5 schemes for proving the existence of God. These 5 schemes are: 1. The Cosmological Argument, advocated by Thomas Aquinas. 2. The Ontological Argument, advocated by Anselm. 3. The Teleological Argument, advocated by William Paley. 4. The Intelligent Design Argument, advocated by Michael B. and others. 5. The Fine-Tuning Argument, advocated by Richard Swinburne and others. While presenting each proof scheme, we will also share the rebuttals to that scheme. Ultimately, it is up to you to judge whether these proofs succeed. Okay, let's enter the main session of the meeting. First, let's welcome the theologian Thomas Aquinas. Since this ultimate thought experiment series is a program for rational discussion, to ensure the quality of our discussion today, let me remind you of 2 ground rules for participating. First, this episode is unrelated to religious belief, it is an intellectual game of rationality. In fact, the proof of God's existence is a classic, very interesting philosophical problem. Today we will introduce both proofs and rebuttals, speaking for both sides, ultimately to enjoy the pleasure of philosophical speculation. Second, this is unrelated to cultural differences, we are discussing a cross-cultural ultimate being. This means that the God we are talking about today is not necessarily the God in the Bible. It can also be understood as the Tao spoken of in Eastern philosophy, or those ultimate supernatural creators handed down in other cultures. He can be personified, or he can be non-personified. Essentially, the second point means, let's not get bogged down in turf wars about whether your God is more powerful or my Allah is stronger. That would derail the discussion. Our focus is more on whether there is, in this world, an ultimate being who transcends nature and dominates nature. For convenience, in today's program, we will unify this ultimate being under the name God. If you aren't used to this word, feel free to mentally replace it with any other term you prefer. Okay, ground rules stated. Now, let's formally introduce the first proof scheme, Thomas Aquinas' Cosmological Argument. The Cosmological Argument essentially says, by studying how this universe was generated, we inevitably deduce that the cause of the universe's generation is God. This sounds a bit like physics, doesn't it? So, how exactly is it proved? He says, first, if we observe all things in the world, we find that whether it is the birth or death or movement of things, there is a cause. For example, if we see a feather flying in the air, there must be a cause for it. And this cause is not created by the feather itself, it cannot move on its own. Its cause must come from another object. For instance, the reason for the feather's flight is the wind, that is, the flow of air drives the movement of the feather. By the same token, for the air to flow, it definitely needs another cause. It is because of the uneven heating of the Earth's surface that causes atmospheric flow. And the uneven heating of the Earth's surface is caused by solar radiation. Then, this solar radiation also has its cause. By analogy, we discover that there is a causal chain in this universe. If we trace this causal chain all the way back, it must terminate at a source. This source no longer needs other causes. It is solely a pure cause in itself. It is the unmoved mover. It initiated the existence, movement, and change of the entire universe. This source is called God. This is Aquinas' cosmological argument. The underlying logic of this proof is: self-causation is impossible. That is to say, a thing cannot be the cause of its own movement, the cause must be found elsewhere. Therefore, there exists a causal sequence. In this causal sequence, infinite regress is impossible. Therefore, this causal sequence must be anchored in a first cause that has no other cause. This first cause is God. The most critical point here is that infinite regress is impossible. This means the chain must be finite. No matter how many times you step back, even if you step back 10 to the power of 100 times, no matter how big the number is, there must be a count. Just like dominoes, there has to be a start, someone had to push the first one. Why can't we just regress infinitely? Aquinas' original words were, "Take away the cause, and the effect is also taken away." Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate, nor any intermediate cause. But if in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause, neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. Therefore it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. Let me translate what Aquinas means. For example, if the universe is a causal sequence of the chicken lays the egg hatches the chicken. If this sequence cannot be anchored in a source, that is, if there is no universal first chicken that laid the first egg, then neither the subsequent chickens nor eggs would exist. Since we observe that both chickens and eggs exist in this world, it proves that the chicken-egg sequence must have a universal first chicken. If you still don't get it, let me change to a more common example. If a beam of light hits your eyes, you might ask, how far did this light come from? The answer is it came from the sun, 150 million kilometers away. Therefore, it took 8 minutes to enter your eyes from the sun. The light you see is from 8 minutes ago. But if someone says there's a beam of light coming from an infinitely far distance, you would think this is unreasonable. Because if it comes from an infinitely far distance, it would take an infinite amount of time, and you would never see that beam of light. So, since you can see the light, you can determine that the light must have a source at a finite distance. This is Aquinas' point: infinite regress is untenable. Since we can see that all things in the universe exist, the causal sequence of the birth, death, and movement of all things must be anchored in a source. And this source is God. Actually, Aquinas here is borrowing Aristotle's concept of the unmoved mover. This has been the Western worldview for a long time. You could say Newtonian mechanics also shares this worldview. Force is the cause of the change in an object's state of motion. Newton also believed that if you deduce to the end, there must be a first impulse to start the universe, and this first impulse comes from God. This is Thomas Aquinas' cosmological argument. Do you think this proof makes sense? Okay, having introduced the cosmological argument, let's introduce the critique of it. Of course, regarding Aquinas' cosmological argument, many criticisms focus on, why must this first mover be your Christian God? Why isn't it our Buddha, or our giant truth system, etc.? We won't detail these criticisms here. As mentioned before, we are not discussing this issue at the level of cultural conflict today. The question is not which brand of God is stronger. The question is, does the generation of the universe require God to endow this first impulse? Regarding this, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant proposed a criticism of the cosmological argument. He said Aquinas' cosmological argument makes a mistake, which is the transcendental application of the category of causality beyond experience. What does this mean? The rationality, or the selling point, of the cosmological argument you, Aquinas, proposed lies in the fact that, I'm not talking faith with you, I'm talking physics. I prove God's existence by presenting facts and reasoning. But Kant asks, is this proof really all facts and reasoning? Is there really no faith involved? Indeed, Aquinas constructed a causal sequence of empirical things based on observation and induction of empirical things. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem lies in the backward deduction. How can you suddenly jump from a causal sequence of empirical things to a first mover that transcends experience? This is the illegal application of the category of causality beyond experience. The category of causality can only be applied to empirical things. Applying it to a transcendental thing, what is that? Your previous causal tracing can be called rational deduction, but this jump from empirical things to the first cause is a leap of faith. So, this is not a rational proof. You believed in this stuff from the start and then performed a circular argument, treating the conclusion that needs to be proved as the evidence for the proof. Another related criticism comes from the British philosopher Bertrand Russell. He believed the cosmological argument commits the fallacy of composition. Russell also called it the fallacy of part and whole. This means, inferring that a whole has property P just because every part of the whole has property P is a fallacy. In 1948, Bertrand Russell and the British theologian Frederick Copleston held that famous debate on the existence of God on BBC Radio. When Copleston threw out the cosmological argument, Russell counterattacked with this fallacy of composition. Russell said, every object in the universe has a cause outside itself, does not deduce that the universe as a whole must have a cause outside the universe. The cosmological argument commits this error. Russell used an analogy. Every human has a mother, but you cannot therefore deduce that the human race as a whole has a mother. These are completely different logical domains. Okay, these are the criticisms of the cosmological argument. Do you think these criticisms hold water? Of course, regarding whether this first impulse is needed, some modern physicists have proposed some simpler, more effortless alternative hypotheses. In these hypotheses, there is no need to trouble God. We will introduce these hypotheses later when discussing intelligent design. Okay, having introduced the cosmological argument and its critiques, let's introduce Anselm's ontological argument. What is an ontological argument? This proof is an a priori proof, as opposed to an a posteriori empirical proof. What is an a posteriori empirical proof? It's when we observe the world and collect empirical evidence. For example, finding that many things in the world cannot be explained, like miracles, the Red Sea parting, or 5 loaves and 2 fish feeding a whole village of 5,000 people. You feel that nature itself cannot explain these things, so it must be the supernatural God doing it. Actually, Aquinas' cosmological argument is also an empirical proof because you must first observe the world, collect empirical evidence, discover a causal sequence, and then deduce God's existence from it. Anselm would say, brother, we are philosophers. Are philosophers' eyes for observing the world or doing field surveys? Are philosophers' hands for fiddling with lab equipment? That's like a theoretical physicist looking down on an experimental physicist. Proving God's existence by collecting empirical evidence is second-rate. We philosophers only need to hide in our little study, sit in an armchair, and speculate right there. Cold, ruthless speculation. Then, through logical deduction, we can deduce that God necessarily exists. This is an a priori ontological argument. Moreover, you must know, empirical evidence is probabilistic, while logical deduction is necessary. I have proved God's existence logically. No matter how you refute it, you can't refute it. Pretty impressive, right? Okay, let's look at how Anselm deduces this. Anselm says, first, we must define God. Only with a clear definition can we reason. So, what is the definition of God? Let's not talk about specific details, like what superpowers God has, whether he can part seawater, or what language he speaks. These details don't matter. We speak of the most fundamental. Fundamentally, God being God means God is the greatest. If there is another being greater than God, then God is not the ultimate being, he becomes the second in command. Then God is not God. This falls into a self-contradiction. Therefore, the definition of God must be, God is the greatest, most perfect, incomparable ultimate being. Okay, with this definition, those who don't believe in God will come to argue, saying such a God does not exist. They say, look, this definition Anselm made, the most perfect ultimate being, is just a concept. It exists only in concepts, or in the minds of you believers, but does not truly exist in reality. Anselm says, good, I was waiting for you to say that. As long as you can conceive of such a greatest and most perfect concept, then this greatest and most perfect concept necessarily exists in reality. Otherwise, it leads to a self-contradiction. Proof complete. This is Anselm's proof process. Did you miss it? Let me break it down for you. Actually, this ontological argument can be broken down into a syllogism. Major premise: God is the most perfect concept we can conceive. Minor premise: the most perfect concept must exist. Conclusion: God exists. First, regarding the major premise, we said before that this is essentially the definition of God. The definition of God is that God is the greatest. If there is something greater and more perfect than God, then God is not God. This is self-contradictory. So God is the greatest and most perfect. We've covered this. The key lies in the minor premise. Why do you, Anselm, say the most perfect concept must exist? This is what the non-believers mentioned earlier said: this most perfect concept is just a concept. It exists only in your minds, not in reality. Anselm then proves the minor premise is true via proof by contradiction. He says, okay, let's assume what you say is true. There is a concept A, which is the most perfect concept, but it exists only in the mind and not in reality. Then, we can conceive of another concept B. Not only is it the most perfect, but it also truly exists. Then, this concept B is more perfect than concept A, which is merely perfect but non-existent, because B has the added attribute of existence. Therefore, the most perfect but non-existent concept A is not the most perfect. Thus, a contradiction appears. Therefore, the most perfect concept must exist. So, God necessarily exists. Proof complete. Regarding this proof process, Descartes, Leibniz, and Hegel would all give it a thumbs up. Mathematicians, in particular, tend to accept Anselm's proof. Descartes, Leibniz, and later Gödel all followed Anselm's ontological argument line of thinking to prove God's existence. If you haven't caught up, you can go back a few seconds to the argument and pause. Feel if there is a logical necessity in it. Okay, having introduced Anselm's ontological argument, let's talk about the criticisms against him. Criticism of Anselm's ontological argument arose in Anselm's own time. There was a monk named Gaunilo who came to refute it. Gaunilo used the method of reductio ad absurdum to refute Anselm's logic. Basically, I will use your line of reasoning to reach an absurd conclusion, thereby refuting your reasoning. Gaunilo said, we can conceive of a most perfect island. This island has everything: mountains of gold and silver, pool parties, ice cream, fine wine, game consoles, the most advanced AI robots to serve you. Unlimited data, unlimited internet. Anyway, it has everything. It is a perfect island. Therefore, such a perfect island necessarily exists. Obviously, this is absurd. Gaunilo said Anselm's reasoning that the most perfect concept necessarily exists is as absurd as saying the most perfect island necessarily exists. We single people particularly relate to this. We all have a concept of a most perfect girlfriend in our minds. This girlfriend makes a delicious dinner for you after work. After dinner, in the quiet of the night, she chats with you about games, sports, Kant, and Hegel. But this most perfect girlfriend is just a concept. Regarding Gaunilo's criticism, since they were contemporaries, Anselm gave a rebuttal. Anselm said, Gaunilo, what are you talking about bringing up an island? Using an island to refute me is invalid. Because my ontological argument applies only to proving the existence of God, this type of most perfect being. An island, no matter how perfect, is a finite thing. For a finite thing, even perfectly conceived, its concept does not contain existence, and it does not lead to a logical self-contradiction. Gaunilo bringing up an island is, in modern terms, like this: Anselm says the most perfect concept is God, and you insist on telling me spaghetti is also God. Can spaghetti be the most perfect? Can spaghetti feed 5,000 people? It can't, it doesn't have that ability. Listening to this, you find Anselm's response has some merit. Anselm said from the start that the ontological argument is an a priori proof, a logical deduction, not involving specific empirical things. So, using specific empirical things as evidence cannot refute the ontological argument. Just like the imaginary girlfriend we conceived, even if she is perfect, she is not the most perfect concept. The most perfect concept can only be God. The most perfect concept itself necessarily exists. The non-existence of the girlfriend does not prove the non-existence of God. Of course, this point also tells us, proving a girlfriend exists is harder than proving God exists. Of course, what Gaunilo didn't make clear in his rebuttal was clarified later by another philosopher, Kant. Kant gave a more systematic criticism of Anselm's ontological argument. We mentioned earlier that Kant criticized the cosmological argument. Here, Kant comes to criticize the ontological argument again. Note, in his book Critique of Pure Reason, Kant criticized various proofs of God's existence, including ontological, cosmological, and teleological. Kant called these methods of proving God using reason rational theology. Kant criticized these rational theologies one by one. This isn't to say Kant claimed God doesn't exist. Kant himself believed in God. Kant meant that there are some fundamental things in this world, like God's existence, free will, the soul entity, that are beyond the scope of our reason and knowledge. They are not objects of scientific knowledge but objects of faith. Thus, there is no such thing as so-called rational theology. Of course, science and reason cannot deny God's existence, but science and reason also cannot prove God's existence. If you try to use science and reason to prove God, your proof will inevitably have bugs. In Kant's words, it will inevitably cause logical antinomies. Okay, back to the point. How did Kant refute the ontological argument? Kant said Anselm confused analytic propositions and synthetic propositions. What is an analytic proposition? It's like a tautology, it adds no new empirical knowledge. For example, a triangle has 3 angles. This is an analytic proposition. In this proposition, the predicate is contained in the subject. Once you propose the subject triangle, you inevitably bring out the predicate has 3 angles. But saying God exists, this is not an analytic proposition. This is a synthetic proposition. Because whether God exists or not cannot be analyzed from the subject God. Whether God exists is not implied in the definition of God. In Kant's words, existence is not a predicate. That is, existence is not a property of an entity. So you cannot first define the subject saying God is a most perfect concept and then analyze from this subject that he necessarily possesses the thing called existence. Whether something exists needs to be verified in the empirical world. It's like conceiving what a perfect girlfriend is like, you just need to think about it in your brain. But if you want to find a real, existing girlfriend, first you have to go outside or open a dating app to look. This is Kant's criticism of Anselm's ontological argument. However, some later philosophers, like Hegel, believed Kant's criticism was just a rehash of Gaunilo's criticism. The logic is the same, insisting that the mathematician go outside and use empirical evidence to refute Anselm's a priori proof. Do you think Kant's criticism holds water? Okay, having introduced Anselm's ontological argument and its critiques, next we introduce the teleological argument for God's existence. The teleological argument is also called the design argument. It says, we observe the world and find that all things in this world are so harmonious and orderly. Mountains, rivers, trees, sun, moon, stars, flowers, birds, fish, insects, all have their places and their purposes. Especially the various organs in animals and humans, they are so exquisite. If we refine it to the microscopic level, DNA, RNA, glucose, ATP synthase, these exquisite structures make us exclaim that nature is truly a master craftsman. The order of this world is so ingenious that we can hardly believe this order was produced by chance. Therefore, behind all this, there must be a purposeful, careful arrangement. The designer behind this, we call God. The core idea of the teleological argument in one sentence is, the order of this world is too exquisite, there must be a purposeful design to explain it. This purposeful design comes from God. This teleological argument, or design argument, was expressed more vividly by the 18th century theologian William Paley. He said, if we see a watch on the ground in the wilderness, we certainly wouldn't think this watch appeared there by chance for no reason. Because the watch is so precise, it must have been designed by a watchmaker and then placed there. By the same token, we see the whole world is so harmonious and exquisite, we can infer from this that a certain intelligent designer designed and created this world. We call this designer God. This teleological argument is also a type of inference to the best explanation. Unlike the ontological argument derived via logical deduction, here we observe the myriad things in the world, find the universe's order is so ingenious, this is a fact. Then we use abductive reasoning to find the best explanation for these marvelous facts. A purposeful, deliberate arrangement and design can explain these marvelous facts. If not explained this way, you tell me the myriad things in the universe underwent no deliberate arrangement and were produced by chance? That makes no sense. Or the probability is too small. It's like letting a monkey press keys on a typewriter. No matter how many attempts you give the monkey, even if you give him 10 to the power of 100 attempts, he cannot coincidentally type out Shakespeare's Hamlet. Okay, that is the teleological argument. The universe is too exquisite to be accidental, there must be a purposeful design to explain it. Okay, having introduced the teleological argument, let's introduce the criticisms of it. Criticisms of the teleological argument first target whether it is a valid best explanation. That is using God's design to explain the world's order really the best explanation? We know Paley's argument is not a strict logical deduction but is based on analogy. Look, things we make, like watches, are designed purposefully by watchmakers. The world is as precise as a watch. So, the best explanation is that the world is also designed. It's not that using analogy for argumentation is invalid, but one must look at how great the similarity is between the two things compared. The Scottish philosopher David Hume commented that the similarity between a watch and the world is too weak. This similarity is more like a literary metaphor. Look, the world is like a watch. This is elementary school sentence-making level. An analogical argument built on such weak similarity has no persuasive power. Another criticism targeting the best explanation argument comes from Hegel. Of course, Hegel's criticism wasn't specifically targeting the teleological argument for God's existence, but rather commenting on the philosophical theories of Descartes, Leibniz, and Berkeley in his lectures on the history of philosophy. He said God, for them, is a large gutter. Whatever their own philosophy couldn't explain clearly, they just threw into this gutter, saying God did it, and considered the matter explained. So, the teleological argument is not a best explanation argument, rather, it looks like a lazy explanation. Whenever you encounter something unexplainable, you just say the old man upstairs did it. That is intellectually lazy. Okay, that's the criticism regarding whether the teleological argument is the best explanation. Additionally, a criticism that dealt even greater damage to the teleological argument is, we admit the world's order is quite exquisite, but the key question is, must order be arranged by a designer? This brings out Darwin's theory of evolution. Darwin himself believed in God, he proposed evolution not to refute God's existence. But this doesn't affect the effect his theory created. It made the world no longer require an extra designer to self-evolve into a mutually adapted state. In other words, evolution overthrew teleology. According to the logic of natural selection, nature has no personality and no purpose. It's not that a designer deliberately designed nature to be so exquisite. It is simply through a trial-and-error algorithm. The environment changes, life forms undergo genetic mutations. These changes and mutations are accidental, purposeless, and directionless, changing into various forms. Among them, life that cannot adapt to the environment is screened out. Life that can adapt is selected, inherited, and amplified. Then, under the action of billions of years, the surviving life on this planet is specifically adapted to the environment. Different species also adapt to each other, making the world as a whole appear very harmonious. But you must know, what you see is the world screened by trial and error, appearing very harmonious, as if there were an arrangement. What you don't see are the victims eliminated in the trial and error algorithm. Natural selection was not very harmonious to those victims. So, if you just stand from a hindsight perspective to look at this harmony and try to find a special explanation for it, that is just self-indulgence caused by survivorship bias. later scientists expanded Darwin's logic of natural selection to the non-living material world. Anything that changes can be explained by the logic of natural selection, without adding an extra designer. Therefore, the entire universe evolved by itself. From the Big Bang, to the universe becoming a soup, to the appearance of atoms, then stars, then planets like our Earth, then life, then us humans, etc. These are all self-evolved. They do not need a designer to arrange them. You see, once this scientific theory came out, the teleologist adding an extra designer to the world seemed very weak. Does this mean teleology was completely extinguished? Of course not. Science cannot completely extinguish teleology because teleologists also learn science. The teleologist says, "You want to talk biology? You think you're high and mighty because you know biology? We have biologists in our camp too. Biologists, you're up." The American biochemist Michael B. proposed a concept called irreducible complexity. What is irreducible complexity? It means a system's whole is made of many parts. If this system is missing any one of these parts, it cannot function. Therefore, for the operation of this system's whole, every part is irreducible. So this system possesses irreducible complexity. B used a mousetrap as an example. He said a mousetrap consists of 5 parts: a wooden base, a metal hammer, a spring, a catch, and a holding bar to hold the hammer when setting the trap. Look at these 5 parts of a mousetrap. If any part is removed, the mousetrap as a whole won't work. So for a device like a mousetrap, it must be that a designer considered the function the whole wanted to achieve in advance. They had to have this purpose first, then go back to design each part based on the function the whole wanted to achieve, and finally assemble them to realize the purpose intended from the start. By the same token, biological organisms and their organs are also irreducible complex systems. If the whole of this system lacks any part, it cannot function. For example, the human eye is a complex system. It is composed of the retina, lens, cornea, etc. And it's not a simple addition of parts, they are combined in a specific way to create an effect where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, finally allowing the eye to see. This is irreducible complexity. Okay, here comes the problem. For such irreducible complex systems, how does evolution explain them? How did the different parts of these complex systems achieve evolving separately on their own? More importantly, how did these different parts combine in a coordinated manner with a synchronized evolutionary rhythm to realize a function where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? For such a massive engineering project, without a designer to unify the coordination, it is fundamentally impossible to form this irreducible complex system through spontaneous evolution. Like we said, a monkey typed out the complete works of Shakespeare on a typewriter. You say he typed randomly? He didn't type randomly. His typing style was purposefully and deliberately trained and arranged. He was well trained, he came prepared. So, evolution saying life forms evolve spontaneously and accidentally is equivalent to saying random typing produced Shakespeare. But random typing cannot produce this irreducible complexity. Therefore, evolution is wrong. So the more reasonable best explanation is, irreducible complex systems were designed by a higher intelligence. Okay, having introduced intelligent design, let's talk about the criticisms against it. If evolutionists want to strike back at intelligent design proponents, they must answer this question: how do complex systems evolve on their own without deliberate design? Fundamentally, the doubt evolutionists must answer is, why are so many things in this world so coincidental that precise biological systems like the eye appeared? It's like a monkey typing Shakespeare. You tell me it's random typing, relying on trial and error? That doesn't seem persuasive. But evolutionists will insist, it is random typing. It is relying on constant trial and error. You might find it incredible, but the key is that the number of random typing attempts is sufficiently large. Theoretically, a monkey typing Shakespeare by chance is not impossible, as long as you give the monkey enough attempts. For example, if this monkey could type every day for 4 billion years, the probability of him happening to type out Shakespeare is not that small. Usually, when we see the history of life evolution in popular science books, it's a timeline drawn on a single sheet of paper. From the origin of life, to prokaryotes, eukaryotes, marine life, land life, mammals, and finally to us humans. This display method easily creates two interrelated illusions for us. Life's evolution history looks like it happened very fast. Precisely because it looks fast, it makes life's evolution seem to have an inevitable direction from simple to complex, as if arranged by someone. But you must know, this period spanned nearly 4 billion years. Just like we said, the monkey typed for 4 billion years. As long as the number of trials is sufficient, the evolution of life will essentially have a trend of developing towards an increasingly complex direction. Note, this isn't saying there is a deliberate arrangement in the unseen steering life to become complex. It is simply a cold mathematical law. Paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould gave a very vivid example to illustrate this mechanism of becoming complex without deliberate arrangement. Gould said, "The path of life's evolution is like a drunkard's walk home from a bar. This path is a narrow lane. To the left is a wall, to the right is a ditch. Logically, the drunkard is drunk, walking unsteadily. Swaying left, swaying right. It is highly random. Let's assume the drunkard falling to the right represents life evolving towards a more complex direction. Randomly falling to the left represents life evolving towards a simpler direction. So, as long as this road is long enough, long like 4 billion years, will the drunkard inevitably fall into the ditch on the right? Why? Because there is a wall on the left. Every time the drunkard falls to the left, he hits the wall and bounces back. What is this wall? This wall represents the minimum unit of life evolution that cannot be simplified further, like single-celled organisms such as bacteria. And indeed, the most abundant species on Earth currently are single-celled organisms. But once evolved to this point, you can't simplify further. Simplify more and it's gone. So life has a ceiling in the simple direction, but no ceiling in the complex direction. So it appears life evolution has a trend of becoming increasingly complex. But having said that, this doesn't mean evolution itself favors complexity or is arranged by anyone to become complex. Just like that drunkard, swaying about, he himself has no conscious purpose. Okay, this is the general response from evolutionists to intelligent design proponents. Life itself needs no arrangement, it will inherently evolve towards a complex direction. So specifically, regarding B's irreducible complexity, how do evolutionists respond? Like the eye, a complex system. Evolutionists need to answer the two questions mentioned before. 1. How did parts evolve separately? 2. How did they combine to function as a greater whole? The evolutionist's answer is, we must know that from our hindsight perspective, the parts of a complex system seem to have evolved to realize the whole's function. But actually, that's not the case. Before realizing the whole's function, the parts originally had other functions. They evolved independently without that specific purpose. Then, by chance and coincidence, they came together to form the current whole. For example, a bird flying is a very complex thing. It requires birds to not only have vein-like feathers but also a special heart-lung structure, a particularly developed cerebellum, etc. These factors combined allow birds to fly. None can be missing. The problem is, these different parts did not initially evolve deliberately in this direction so that the bird could fly. They originally had their own different functions. For example, bird feathers. Feathers might have been selected by natural selection originally for insulation. Of course, warmth doesn't require the current vein-like feathers, down is enough. Later, the ancestors of birds evolved vein-like feathers driven by sexual selection, showing off for mating. This drove the vein-like feathers into a positive feedback loop of development. Finally, due to a series of coincidental reasons, it was discovered by chance that these vein-like feathers were also good for flight. Stephen Jay Gould called this phenomenon, where something originally had one function and then accidentally gained another function, exaptation. We can find a massive amount of exaptation phenomena in biological evolutionary history. Let's use a more intuitive example. It's like the Argentina team winning the 2022 World Cup. The players cooperated skillfully, Messi and Di Maria coordinated well, goalkeeper Martinez performed heroically, so they won the championship. But you can't say in reverse that they lived since childhood for the purpose of winning the 2022 World Cup. Or that Messi's mom and dad met for the first time for the purpose of winning the 2022 World Cup. They had other life goals when they were young. Then, the players grew up, accidentally formed a team, accidentally meshed well, and accidentally won the 2022 World Cup. From a hindsight perspective, it seems like everything was the best arrangement. But what you don't see are the things eliminated by natural selection. There are too many. Good seeds who didn't make the Argentina national team due to injury, family reasons, or accidents are countless. Evolution is trial and error. Trial and error relies on luck. The key lies, again, in the fact that the number of trials is sufficiently large. Okay, so now, teleologists have unleashed a new move against evolution. They say, hey, we admit evolution. We even admit the broad sense of evolution, that the entire universe evolved on its own. But pay attention. The problem with evolution is that although it can explain the evolution of all things in the universe, it cannot explain the existence of the universe itself. That is, evolution can explain the universe going from 1 to 100, but it cannot explain how the universe went from 0 to 1. We now know the universe exploded from a singularity 13.8 billion years ago. According to current physics, after this singularity experienced 10 to the power of minus 36 seconds, it suddenly experienced an explosion. This explosion process lasted only 10 to the power of minus 33 seconds. Within this fraction of a second, the universe's volume increased by 10 to the power of 78 times. After the explosion ended, the universe expanded at the later rate. Only then was it a universe conforming to general relativity. This means, we can explain the messy stuff that happened after the explosion with existing scientific laws. But the problem lies in what happened before the explosion. What exactly was the universe before the explosion? Why did this singularity exist? Existing physics hasn't figured this out. This means existing scientific laws can only explain existing things, but cannot explain being itself. Existence itself is a miracle. This miracle needs a higher intelligence to arrange it to make sense. To this claim by modern teleologists, the atheist response is, modern teleologists are committing a fallacy here called the false dilemma. What is a false dilemma? It says, look, physics can't explain the universe before the explosion, right? Oh, since you can't explain it currently, it must be arranged by a higher intelligence. This is lazy reasoning. Who says that what physics cannot explain currently must be arranged by a higher intelligence? Can't we just suspend judgment and wait for physics to further develop and perfect itself to solve it? Actually, coming back to it, there are scholars who have given positive explanations for the origin of the universe from an atheist perspective. For example, physicist Stephen Hawking proposed a hypothesis for the universe's origin called the no-boundary proposal. Simply put, the universe is a Big Bang out of nothing. It doesn't need a starter setup anymore. Because the Big Bang is a quantum event. Before the Big Bang, the universe was in a quantum superposition state. Then the universe's wave function suddenly collapsed, and thus, out of nothing, for no reason, it initiated the Big Bang. That's roughly the meaning. In short, indecision? Quantum mechanics. Modern teleologists did not let it go. Modern teleologists said, you want to talk physics? You think you're high and mighty because you know physics? We have physicists in our camp too. Physicists, you're up. So, they threw out the fine-tuning argument. The fine-tuning argument is still a teleological argument or design argument. The underlying logic is the same, the universe is too exquisite. So exquisite that there must be a purposeful, deliberate design to explain it. However, the knowledge level of these teleologists has improved further. Not only did they learn biochemistry, now they are using physics as evidence. What is a fine-tuned universe? Simply put, some of the most basic physical laws and physical constants of this universe are very exquisite, and exquisitely so without reason. It seems they were fine-tuned by some higher intelligence specifically to allow life to appear, or even to allow humans to appear. Of course, there are many scholars advocating the fine-tuning argument. It's hard to say which specific representative proposed it. Relatively famous ones include philosopher Richard Swinburne and physicist Russell Stannard. Some even say the physicist Yang Chen-Ning can be considered a scholar sympathetic to the fine-tuning argument. Because a few years ago, in a lecture, Mr. Yang made a statement that concisely popularized the basic spirit of the fine-tuning argument. Let's listen to this one-minute statement by Mr. Yang. If you ask me if there is a God? Well, if the God you mean is in the shape of a man, then I think not. If you ask if there is a creator? Then I think there is. Because the structure of this whole world is not accidental. So, where do these things, so non-accidental, so powerful, so influential, come from? I am over 90 years old now. As I get older, my view on this question is changing. At 20, I would have resolutely opposed personifying this creator or nature. But as I gradually got older, the motivation to oppose this is decreasing. Why? As I get older, my self-confidence is shrinking. Because I see so many exquisite, marvelous things. I feel the possibility of me thoroughly understanding these things is getting smaller. So, if you say this means I have more religious feeling, I think that is a correct statement. Okay, having simply popularized the basic spirit of fine-tuning, what exactly are those marvelous things Mr. Yang mentioned? Where is the marvel? How marvelous is it? Okay, let's specifically explain what exactly was tuned in universe fine-tuning. We want to know why modern physics can become the science of sciences, the hardest core of all sciences. Its proudest feature is that it is a whole theoretical edifice derived mathematically based on first principles. Then, based on this, it can explain everything in the world. We must know that physicists have always wanted to create a grand unified theory or a theory of everything for the entire universe. That is, to integrate general relativity and quantum mechanics into the same theoretical model. Actually, this is taking that proudest feature of modern physics we just mentioned to the extreme, using a concise mathematical model to explain the myriad things in the universe. Einstein spent his later years trying to create a unified theory. Of course, he spent his later years on this and didn't succeed until he died. Although physicists' ultimate ideal hasn't been fully realized yet, physicists have currently proposed a staged quasi-theory of everything called the Standard Model of Particle Physics. This model includes basic particles that make up matter, like quarks and leptons, and also includes basic physical interactions, strong interaction, weak interaction, and electromagnetic interaction. Except for not being able to explain gravity, everything in the universe can be reduced to the basic particles and interactions in this standard model. But here comes the problem. In this standard model, physicists surprisingly discovered there are 25 underlying free parameters that are set just so without reason. What is a free parameter? It means these parameters are not derived from calculation. They just happen to take this value. There is no reason. It's like the most critical underlying components of this physics building derived from math. We don't know where they came from. Why are they called free parameters? It means the values of these parameters can be freely adjusted. They don't have to take this value. If they took other values, this standard model of physics would still be consistent. That is, if these parameters took other values, the universe could still exist consistently. But, if the free parameters changed even a tiny bit, the universe would not evolve life, or even produce stars, or even have chemical changes. But such a universe could totally exist. So the question is, who tuned these adjustable parameters to this not too much, not too little, just right value that allows chemistry, allows stars, and allows life to evolve? This is too abstract. Let's use a specific example. We all know the fine structure constant alpha. It is a key constant in quantum electrodynamics, representing the strength of the coupling between electric charges in electromagnetic interaction. In the standard model, it is the electromagnetic coupling constant. So, any electromagnetic phenomenon depends on this fine structure constant alpha. The problem is, the fine structure constant is not calculated. You write the equation, but you must manually input this number. This number is determined by experiment. The value determined by experiment is 1/137.035999139. The value cannot be more or less. Why? If the value of alpha deviated by 4% from the current value, stable carbon would not exist in the universe. We all know carbon is a necessary element for our existing life. As for why this fine structure constant must be 1/137.035999139, we don't know. There is no reason. Another example, the masses of the up quark and down quark are also free parameters in the standard model. We know everything is made of atoms. Atoms are made of electrons and nuclei. Nuclei are made of protons and neutrons. Protons and neutrons are made of quarks. The difference is, a proton is made of 2 up quarks plus 1 down quark. A neutron is made of 2 down quarks plus 1 up quark. I just said the masses of up and down quarks are free parameters. The down quark's mass is currently set to be slightly larger than the up quark. This causes the neutron's mass to be only about 0.1% heavier than the proton. And this 0.1% difference is extremely important. Otherwise, protons would decay into neutrons, and there would be no stable atomic nuclei. This means the universe would have no chemical changes. But the universe doesn't require chemistry to exist. A universe without chemistry can exist consistently. So the question is, why is the relative mass of up and down quarks set to this current not too much, not too little, just right state? Let's take basic physical constants from general relativity as examples. For example, gravity. If the universe's gravity were slightly stronger than it is now, stars would become unstable and burn out very quickly. On the other hand, if gravity were slightly weaker than it is now, the pressure inside stars wouldn't be enough, and they couldn't emit light or heat at all. So the question is, why is gravity set to this not too much, not too little, just right state? Gravity is just one link. There are too many other factors that need to coordinate with gravity. For example, cosmic expansion. We know gravity is the force that gathers matter together. Conversely, there is a force that makes the universe expand. This force comes from dark energy. If the effect of dark energy were slightly stronger than now, matter in the universe couldn't gather into stars under the influence of gravity. If the effect of dark energy were slightly weaker than now, the universe after the Big Bang would quickly shrink back. So the question is, why is the effect of dark energy set to this not too much, not too little, just right state? Okay, there are many more of these basic physical constants. Limited by space, we won't list them all. We must note here, the examples just mentioned, like the fine structure constant changing by 4% causing whatever, or the proton mass changing by 0.1% causing whatever, all have a premise. Only this one parameter changes a tiny bit while other parameters remain unchanged. Chemistry is gone, stars are gone, life is gone. This implies, when all these different physical constants are combined, the available survival interval becomes infinitely smaller. Even a tiny bit of change is not allowed. So the question is, why does the combination of all current parameters land exactly in the golden interval? Does this indicate that to make life appear, a higher intelligent designer, when creating the universe, fine-tuned these physical constants long ago so that they all landed precisely in the golden interval? This is the fine-tuning argument. Man, sometimes thinking about it, this fine-tuning phenomenon is truly magical. Really, this universe isn't just a little coincidental. It is too damn coincidental. Coincidental to the point of being incredible. Physicist Lee Smolin calculated that if these basic physical constants were selected randomly, then the probability of randomly drawing a combo meal of physical constants capable of evolving life is 1 in 10 to the power of 229. For such a coincidence, you can't tell me this is random typing. Random typing cannot type out 1 in 10 to the power of 229. Some people refute this by saying, isn't this the same line of thinking as Michael B's irreducible complexity mentioned earlier? That every parameter is coincidental, and combined they form an even more coincidental whole combo, forming this universe suitable for life. We can refute this using the logic of evolution again. The universe has existed for 13.8 billion years. Over such a long time, through constant trial and error, mere natural selection could let this universe evolve into a universe suitable for life. This is like winning the lottery. The probability is small, but the time is long enough. Buying tickets for 13.8 billion years, you should win eventually, right? But don't get it wrong. The fine-tuning proponent asks, excuse me, what is the premise of evolution? It's that the thing changes over time, right? And then under natural selection, it becomes more and more suitable for survival. But ask yourself, what is a physical constant? Constant means it is not a variable. It is an unchanging quantity, that's why it's called a constant. It's like the speed of light is 299,792,458 meters per second. Do you think 10 billion years ago the speed of light was younger and ran faster? We know life can evolve. The cosmic environment can evolve. But physical laws and physical constants have been constant and unchanging since the birth of the universe. This means, natural selection does not work for explaining physical constants. This really stumps the atheist. Because the fine-tuning argument crippled the natural selection martial art. Without natural selection, the atheist really doesn't know how to fight back. So, if you talk about universe design to a scientist, and you just say the universe is so coincidental, you look uneducated. But if you talk to him about fine-tuning, he at least has to treat your statement seriously. Because after all, when you know these underlying truths, you have to utter yang chen ning sai. The more you know, the harder it is to believe this universe was produced by chance. This universe is too coincidental. It's not just biological coincidence. Biological coincidence can be explained by evolution. It is physical constant coincidence. That is truly too coincidental. For this doubled coincidence, you must give a doubled, extraordinary explanation. Astronomer Carl Sagan said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Of course, this sentence is usually used to refute superstition or theism. But here, we can apply the sentence structure in reverse. Extraordinary coincidences also require extraordinary explanations. We find some things are too coincidental to the point of being incredible. Then the most reasonable, concise, effortless, best explanation is, these coincidences were designed for a purpose. This is the fine-tuning argument. Do you think this proof makes sense? Okay, having spoken of the proof, let's speak of the criticisms against it. If you want to refute the fine-tuning argument, the most critical question lies in how to explain the phenomenon of universe fine-tuning. How to explain that the values of physical constants are all so perfect. The teleologist's explanation is that they were fine-tuned by God or a higher intelligence. If you want to refute this, you need to explain the fine-tuning phenomenon without God. I have roughly summarized that if we want to explain fine-tuning without God, there are about 5 approaches. Let's go through them one by one. The first approach, the physical constants of this universe were actually not so-called tuned to perfection. That is, they were not fine-tuned. This means this universe is not special at all. You think it's special because you live inside this universe. So you always have the illusion that everything is the best arrangement. Actually, if the physical constants of this universe took other values, life could still be born. Physicist Roni Harnick and others believe that even if this universe had no weak interaction, life could theoretically still evolve. Astronomer Abraham Loeb believes that even if the cosmological constant were 1,000 times larger than it is now, life could still exist on planets in dwarf galaxies. In short, this universe is not special. It wasn't fine-tuned just right to let life be born. Of course, this claim is just a theoretical speculation. There is no solid evidence. Because this is assuming, if our underlying game rules were different, what kind of game could we play? It's hard to say. Furthermore, if you say life could evolve even with other physical constants, making it seem like evolving life or even intelligent life is easy, then the question arises, why haven't we received any signals from alien civilizations yet? If universal constants aren't special, logically alien civilizations should have evolved long ago. So, where are they? Of course, this is another thought experiment Fermi paradox, which I dedicated a specific episode to on my channel before. The second explanation for fine-tuning is, these physical constants are actually not true constants. That is, they were not set to these values without reason. It is very likely they are results calculated based on a more fundamental grand unified theory. We said before that physicists want to find a grand unified theory, but haven't fully achieved it yet, right? That standard model of particle physics is not actually the true grand unified theory because it hasn't included general relativity. That's why there are 20-something so-called free parameters with unknown origins. They look like they were deliberately fine-tuned to those values. But when one day our physicists find a more underlying grand unified theory that can unify quantum mechanics and general relativity, we will discover, hey, these 20 numbers weren't fine-tuned. They were calculated. By then we will find that these numbers are not exquisite or magical at all. You just calculate according to that more underlying first principle, just sit there and calculate, cold and ruthless calculation, and you calculate these numbers out. Things we cannot explain temporarily do not prove the world is magical. What we need to do is wait for the further development of physics to solve it. Of course, the rebuttal to this response is, first, whether this grand unified theory can be found is a question. Physicists of the last century were ambitiously looking for it. Current physicists are somewhat lying flat on this. Secondly, even if you find a grand unified theory that unifies all current physics, that is, you find a broader first principle, you still face this question: why is this first principle the way it is? Why is this first principle given in a state suitable for evolving life? You will always face this question. Okay, these are the first two explanations for fine-tuning. The next three explanations all use a trick, trying to train the natural selection martial art, which was crippled by the fine-tuning argument, back to health, and use it to fight again. Let's talk about the third explanation. The physical constants of this universe are not constant and unchanging, but change over time. We said before that physical constants are not variables, so natural selection doesn't work on unchanging things. But what if the so-called physical constants do change over time? Then natural selection can explain why their values are so ingenious. In the long 13.8 billion years, through the trial and error algorithm, exactly at this time point in this cosmic space, the values of physical constants happen to evolve into the interval suitable for life. Years ago, physicist Paul Dirac believed that the gravitational constant g changes over time. It decreases as the age of the universe increases. Of course, this was just a hypothesis. Additionally, regarding the fine structure constant alpha mentioned before, in recent years some physicists believe alpha's value changes over time. And this time it's not just a hypothesis, but has some experimental evidence. In 1999, Australian astronomer John Webb measured the spectrum emitted by quasars 12 billion years ago and calculated that the value of alpha 12 billion years ago differed from the current alpha on Earth by 1 part in a million. In 2000, Webb's team observed the spectra of 143 quasars and calculated that alpha changed by about 1 part in 200,000 over the past 11 billion years. Of course, other scientists think this is likely observation error. Webb's team insists their observation and calculation are accurate. Naturally, this is still under debate and cannot be considered solid proof. But we can imagine, if physical constants really change, our worldview needs to be reconstructed. This implies general relativity might be overturned, or at least undergo major revisions. It brings more unknowns than knowns. Okay, that's the third explanation. The next explanation trying to bring back natural selection is, our universe's physical constant combo is just one of the combos in a multiverse. We mentioned physicists are trying to find a grand unified theory. One candidate is M-theory. M-theory is actually the superstring theory that Sheldon studied in the early seasons of the Big Bang Theory. M-theory is also the theory Hawking bragged about in his book The Grand Design. This theory supports the multiverse. What does this mean? It means the physical constants of our universe don't necessarily have to take these values. Why did they happen to take these values? Because M-theory allows for many different combo meals of physical constants, about 10 to the power of 500 combinations. These different combos correspond to different parallel universes. In different parallel universes, there are different physical constants, and thus different physical laws. For example, in some universes, space is not three-dimensional. In some universes, the up quark is heavier than the down quark, so there is no chemical reaction. This causes the vast majority of parallel universes to not evolve life. This is a high probability event. Only in extremely few universes is the physical constant combo suitable for evolving life. And we just happen to live in one of these extremely few universes. This says, it's not that a designer fine-tuned our universe's constants. What you see is that our constants coincidentally fit the conditions for life evolution. But what you don't see is the desolation of the vast majority of parallel universes. Indeed, physical laws cannot evolve within this universe. But we have multiple parallel universes. Different universes have different constants. So natural selection can work on physical constants again. This is M-theory's explanation for fine-tuning. Of course, some people refute this, saying M-theory is currently just a mathematical calculation with no physical evidence. Existence of other parallel universes, where do you find measurable evidence? So M-theory cannot be falsified. It's getting more and more mystical. Didn't Sheldon eventually give up and switch research directions? Okay, that is the fourth explanation, multiverse. The fifth explanation is similar to the fourth. It also says our universe is not unique, so natural selection can still work on physical constants. Furthermore, the reason the universe can be subject to natural selection is that the universe itself is like a biological organism, it has birth and death, and universes reproduce. Physicist Lee Smolin proposed a theory called cosmological natural selection. He says, "Aren't there black holes in our universe? We know the mechanism of black hole generation is a star burning out and collapsing under gravity. If the star's mass is large enough, it collapses into a black hole. The matter in the black hole is compressed to an infinitely dense point, a singularity. Smolin believes that before reaching the singularity, the matter in the black hole might start expanding again and Big Bang into a new universe. So the universe is like budding, constantly self-replicating through black hole collapse and explosion. The universe is a biological organism. Then, the new universe born from the black hole of the previous universe naturally possesses reproductive ability too, that is, it can also produce black holes. This logic is a biological logic. In biology, if we ask why does a certain creature have a specific trait? For example, why do humans have opposable thumbs? The answer is, because opposable thumbs are beneficial for human reproduction. So natural selection selected the opposable thumb. By the same token, on a cosmic scale, if we ask why are the physical constants of this universe set like this? It is because universes with such constants allow black holes to form, thereby allowing self-replication. So natural selection selected the universes with such physical constant values. The old universe births a new universe. And the physical constants of the new universe will be slightly different from the old one. Just like us having children, there will be a certain degree of genetic mutation. The child looks like me but is a little different. As the generations of reproduction increase, to a certain magnitude, eventually, a set of physical constants will evolve that happens to be suitable for birthing intelligent civilizations. This is the power of natural selection. Of course, regarding this biological universe theory, other scholars have criticized, or more accurately, modified, it. For example, cosmologist Edward Harrison and the father of inflation theory Alan Guth believe, we admit the universe is constantly created through black hole collapse. This theory is fine. But the mechanism of creation is not entirely natural selection. Why? Because the probability of evolving a universe where every physical constant fits intelligent life via natural selection is too small. To increase this probability, it can be achieved entirely through purposeful arrangement. For example, gene editing. Achieving a universe suitable for intelligent life via natural selection is like trying to get a genius child via genetic mutation. How many generations would that take? The probability is too small. But through gene editing, we can directly customize a genius child. As the saying goes, the poor rely on mutation, the rich rely on technology. If we humans master the technological means, we can break the shackles of natural selection and purposefully create a universe suitable for evolving intelligent civilization. So what is the specific process? They say intelligent life in the previous universe, let's call them aliens, or rather alienverse people, created and fine-tuned our universe through high technology, enabling our universe to evolve intelligent life, us humans. Then, when we humans develop to a certain stage, for example, humans inventing a massive hadron collider, we can create black holes through technological means, thereby creating a new Big Bang and birthing a new universe. Of course, our human mission is also to fine-tune that universe into a state suitable for evolving intelligent life when creating the new universe, passing this intelligence down through the multiverse. In this sense, this creator is God. Of course, if this is the case, we face a problem. Who created the universe of the alienverse people who created our universe? This returns to the question we mentioned when discussing Aquinas, the validity of infinite regress. And this question becomes never-ending. Okay, regarding the fine-tuning argument and its critiques, we will stop here. Next, let's enter the meeting conclusion. In this episode, we shared 3 major categories, totaling 5 types of proofs for God's existence. Let's summarize simply. The cosmological argument says the start of the universe must have a first cause, because everything cannot be the cause of itself. The cause of movement and change comes from other things. Thus, there is a causal sequence in the universe. Since infinite regress is impossible, this causal sequence must be anchored in a first cause with no other cause. This is God. The ontological argument is an a priori proof through logical deduction. It says as long as we can conceive a greatest and most perfect concept, then this concept necessarily exists in reality. Otherwise, it falls into logical contradiction. The teleological argument says the order of the universe is too coincidental. Extraordinarily coincidental. Coincidental to the point where it's hard to believe it was produced by chance. Coincidental to the point where being deliberately designed by a higher being is the best explanation for this coincidence. Of course, with the development of modern science, the teleological argument has incorporated scientific discoveries as material and evidence. Intelligent design proponents believe the biochemical structure of life forms is extraordinarily exquisite. It is hard to believe it was produced by chance. Fine-tuning proponents believe the physical constants of the universe are extraordinarily exquisite. It is hard to believe they were produced by chance. Therefore, a designer's design is the more reasonable explanation. Of the three categories of proof schemes introduced today, which one do you agree with more? Or do you have a better response scheme for this ultimate thought experiment? The so-called God problem we discussed today is actually a metaphysical problem cloaked in religious garb. It is the first sentence in German philosopher Martin Heidegger's book Introduction to Metaphysics. Why are there beings at all instead of nothing? This is the most basic question of metaphysics. Why does this world exist at all? There is no reason it must exist. It could totally not exist. But it exists. We need an explanation for this. Otherwise, we cannot stand the state of having no explanation. Because, after all, there is a me in this world. I am inside this world. I cannot come to this causeless world for no reason. Although this explanation traces back 13.8 billion years, appearing to have nothing to do with me. In a sense, the events of 13.8 billion years ago do concern me. I hope it has an explanation. Today, we shared explanations from some philosophers and scientists regarding this big question. I invite you to participate in the discussion of this question along with the philosophers. Their views have been expressed. Now, it is your turn to speak. Please publish your views in the comments section below the video. Thank you for watching until here. I believe you are also a friend who likes to think and is full of imagination. Please help me by liking, subscribing, and sharing. I look forward to seeing you next time.